This was a case of serial shootings that shocked the entire nation. The sniper openly operated in Washington, D.C., where the White House is located, and its surrounding areas, killing 5 people on his deadliest day. People were terrified, afraid to go outside, fearing the next bullet would be aimed at them. The shooter's movements were stealthy, leaving no trace. To catch this ghost hunting from the shadows, state police, the FBI, the Secret Service, and others were all mobilized. Thousands of officers flooded the streets in what became one of the largest manhunts in American history. Hello everyone, this is DarkCaseX. I'm your host. So what exactly happened back then? Let's travel back to 2002 and revisit this frantic serial shooting spree. Washington, D.C., or simply Washington, is a 177 square kilometer area that serves as the capital of the United States. It was named in honor of America's first president, George Washington. It doesn't belong to any U.S. state, but is a special administrative district governed directly by the U.S. Congress. Important federal institutions we often hear about, like the White House and the Capitol building, are located here. Logically, as the nation's heart, security measures here should be extremely robust, and criminals wouldn't dare to commit crimes so brazenly. However, the serial shooting case we're discussing today took place in Washington, D.C. and its surrounding areas. October 2, 2002, at 5:20 p.m. It was a perfectly normal Wednesday. At a busy craft store in Aspen Hill, Maryland, a gunshot suddenly rang out. A store window was shattered, but luckily, no one was hurt. As a result, it didn't draw much attention. Who could have known that a long premeditated and nationally shocking shooting spree had just begun? Just 70 minutes later, at 6:30 p.m., 55-year-old James Martin, an analyst for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, was in the parking lot of a grocery store in Glenmont, Maryland, when he was shot and collapsed to the ground. A woman in the same parking lot happened to witness the scene and quickly called the police.
Is he bleeding?
Yes.
Where's he bleeding from?
I don't know. I'm like half an aisle away from him.
Is it inside?
No, it's outside in a parking lot. Oh, there's a police officer here now.
The police arrived at the scene as quickly as possible, but Martin's injuries were too severe. He was bleeding profusely and died a few minutes later. Upon examination, Martin had been shot once. The bullet entered through his back and exited through his chest. The exit wound was much larger than the entry wound, suggesting it was caused by a high-powered rifle. October 3rd, 7:41 a.m. 39-year-old landscape designer James Buchanan Jr. was mowing a lawn in front of a car dealership in Rockville, Maryland. He was on a casual lawn when another shot rang out, and he fell to the ground. Because the noise of the lawnmower masked the gunshot, a neighbor only called the police after seeing him collapse. When police arrived, they found Buchanan had been shot in the chest. They rushed him to the hospital as fast as they could, but sadly, he couldn't be saved. 2 consecutive shootings made the police realize the gravity of the situation. However, the bloody massacre had only just begun. 31 minutes later, at 8:12 a.m., 54-year-old taxi driver Prem Kumar Walekar pulled his car into a mobile gas station in Aspen Hill, Maryland. While he was refueling, a bullet came whistling through the air, and he collapsed in a pool of blood. 25 minutes later, at 8:37 a.m., 34-year-old nanny Sarah Ramos had just gotten off a bus at the Leisure World shopping center in Norbeck. She was sitting on a bench, waiting and reading a book she had with her. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, and she fell to the ground. Sarah was shot in the head. The bullet was incredibly powerful. After entering through her forehead, it exited through her neck and even shattered the window of a restaurant behind her. An officer found the bullet head in the restaurant. They speculated it was a .223 caliber bullet. This type of bullet is generally fired from a rifle and is highly lethal. Beyond that, there were no other clues. At 9:58 a.m., 25-year-old Lori Ann Lewis Rivera was at the intersection of Connecticut Avenue and Knowles Avenue at a Shell gas station, vacuuming her car. Again, a single shot, and she was killed instantly. At 9:20 p.m., 72-year-old retired carpenter Pascal Charlot was walking on Georgia Avenue in Washington, D.C. A bullet flew out of the darkness. Although he was rushed to the hospital, he unfortunately passed away an hour later. It was only then that the bloody day finally came to an end. On October 3rd alone, there were 5 consecutive shootings. Each time it was a single, fatal shot. Extremely precise. No traces were left at the scene. It seemed like the work of a professional hitman. Police dispatched a large number of officers for a grid search, but they found nothing. During interviews, no residents saw any suspicious individuals. The killer was like a ghost. As if they were never there, the police tried to find a breakthrough by looking at the motive. Generally speaking, there are 3 main motives: money, revenge, or a crime of passion. However, there was no connection between the victims. The shooter, from beginning to end, never approached the victims, let alone took any valuables from them. From this, it was inferred that the killer was simply killing for the sake of killing. And it was a random attack. These types of cases are the hardest to solve, as the shootings made headlines in major American newspapers, and on the news, the people of Maryland and Washington, D.C. were all terrified. Everyone was on edge, hoping the police would solve the case quickly. As for the police, the investigation was led by Montgomery County Police Chief Charles Moose. But the problem was that there were too few clues. There was simply nothing to go on. Amidst the police's anxiety and the public's widespread panic, the nightmare continued. October 4th, 2:30 p.m. 43-year-old housewife Caroline Sewell was in Fredericksburg, Virginia, at a shopping center loading groceries next to her car. A shot rang out, and she collapsed. Fortunately, she was saved, becoming the first survivor of this series of shootings. The location where Caroline was shot was very far from the previous crime scenes. This meant the sniper's range of activity was extremely wide, and the police's search area had to be greatly expanded. The continuous shootings put everyone on high alert. The first thing people did when they got home was draw their curtains and avoid going out. This is very similar to another story I've told before involving a veteran named Dorner, who openly declared war on the police, putting the entire Los Angeles and even California police force on high alert. The officers and their families on his hit list hid indoors all day with the curtains drawn, terrified of being shot in the head. The largest manhunt in California history was launched to catch him. It was a chilling reminder of how just one perpetrator can terrorize and paralyze an entire region. Returning to our story, 7 shootings occurred in 3 days. At the time, the news media was almost entirely focused on reporting this serial shooting spree. The police were like they were being roasted over a fire. The pressure was immense. To solve the case quickly, Chief Charles held a press conference to ask the public for clues and offered a $200,000 reward.
We're still convinced that people have seen something. We want to talk to them. We want to follow up.
Soon, over 100,000 tips poured in like a tidal wave. The vast majority of it was useless information. Police worked day and night to investigate every lead. High-level authorities also took the case seriously. The FBI, the Secret Service, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and police forces from all affected areas were mobilized to fully cooperate with the investigation. Currently, the only information the police had was that the shooter had a powerful rifle, was an expert marksman, and had their own vehicle. Based on public tips and simulated test firings at the crime scenes, the police speculated that the killer's vehicle was likely a white box van. Immediately, thousands of officers set up roadblocks in Washington and the surrounding roads, focusing their search on white box vans, but aside from causing traffic jams, it yielded no results. The police racked their brains and implemented a pursuit plan called concentric circles. The idea was that as soon as a witness reported a sighting, they would immediately use the location as a center to set up a circular blockade and inspect all vehicles within the circle. In theory, if the response was fast enough, it was indeed a good method. Over the next few days, the sniper did not strike again. Until October 7th at 8:09 a.m., 13-year-old student Iran Brown was dropped off by his aunt at Benjamin Tasker Middle School in Maryland. The school had already implemented security measures with a large number of officers patrolling nearby. But before Brown could even walk through the school gates, a shot rang out. Brown fell. His aunt, who was a nurse, rushed him to the emergency room. He was shot in the chest. and seriously injured. Fortunately, he ultimately survived. After this incident, public anger reached its peak, targeting a student. It was utterly depraved. Many people suggested that schools in Washington, D.C. and the surrounding areas should be temporarily closed to protect the students' safety. But after discussion, the government did not agree. However, all extracurricular activities were suspended. Once students entered the classroom, they were not allowed out. More police were also dispatched to patrol around schools. Any sports games, performances, and other public events were canceled. Children's routines became a straight line between school and home. Even so, some parents were still worried and didn't dare let their children go to school. If residents absolutely had to go out, they would run as much as possible, even crouching down and running in a zigzag pattern. Meanwhile, the police's once confident concentric circles plan was not very effective in practice because the shooter's range of activity was too large. There simply wasn't enough manpower to cover all areas, and the response time wasn't fast enough. Plus, the sniper knew the terrain, escaped quickly, and always managed to get away one step ahead of the police. However, this time, after the student was attacked, hundreds of officers searching the woods and fields around the school unexpectedly found one of the sniper's hiding spots. There was also a shell casing. Upon examination, it was a .223 caliber Remington bullet. Weapons experts speculated that the weapon used by the sniper was a Bushmaster semi-automatic rifle. You can think of it as the civilian version of the military M16. Most importantly, the shooter also deliberately left behind a death tarot card. It had a taunting message written on it. To avoid provoking the sniper, the police decided not to publicize the tarot card. But somehow, the media got their hands on the information. Anyway, the very next day, the tarot card was exposed by major media outlets. October 9th, 8:18 p.m. 53-year-old civil engineer Dean Harold Myers was at a gas station in Prince William County, Virginia, refueling his car when he was shot and killed. October 11th, 9:30 a.m. 53-year-old businessman Kenneth Bridges was refueling at a gas station near Interstate 95 in Spotsylvania County, Virginia, when he was shot and killed. October 14th, 9:15 p.m. 47-year-old FBI intelligence analyst Linda Franklin was in a parking lot in Fairfax County, Virginia, when she was shot and killed. The sniper, as if he knew the police's deployment, always managed to escape precisely. Each time, he left no direct evidence. Although there were occasional witnesses providing tips, most were proven to be false information. In other words, no one had ever seen the sniper. This highlighted his professionalism. Some shootings even happened in public areas, especially at gas stations. People became even more afraid. If their cars were out of gas, they would crouch down and use their vehicles to shield themselves. Some gas stations also took protective measures, like using tarps to create simple barriers to block the line of sight and reduce the risk of being shot. October 19th, 8 p.m. 37-year-old Jeffrey Hopper was in a parking lot near Interstate 95 in Virginia. When he was shot, fortunately, his wife called for help, and after 5 surgeries, his life was saved. This time, the sniper once again deliberately left a clue. In the woods not far from the scene, a police dog found a shell casing and a note tacked to a tree. On the note, the sniper still referred to himself as God and had written a 4-page letter. This time, he made a clear demand for the police to wire $10 million to a designated account, and he would stop the attacks. Otherwise, the killing would continue. He even threatened to target children. Chief Charles held another press conference, publicly addressing the sniper, hoping the person would call again to communicate.
We do want to talk to you. Call us at the number you provided. Thank you.
On the morning of October 21st, the sniper called the number he had left. On the note, it was the number for a restaurant near where the victim from the 19th, Jeffrey, was shot. On the phone, the sniper told the police not to play games and just wire the money as requested. Otherwise, they would face the consequences. Police placed several snipers in the surrounding area, but ultimately found nothing, although they quickly traced the sniper's call to its location, a payphone at a gas station. No witnesses saw anyone suspicious. They did, however, mistakenly arrest 2 undocumented immigrants. Seeing they were at a stalemate, the police had no choice but to appeal to the public again. On October 22nd, possibly in retaliation for the police not wiring the money, the sniper struck again. At 5:56 a.m., 35-year-old bus driver Conrad Johnson was shot in Aspen Hill, Maryland, and tragically died. As we can see on the map, the sniper was almost always active around Washington, D.C. and its vicinity. His movements were erratic. Police deployed a large number of officers to check vehicles on nearby highways, but they could never find a trace of the sniper. Since October 2nd, the shootings had been going on for 21 days. 13 people had been shot, and 10 had died. And in all that time, the only clues police had were the murder weapon was a Bushmaster .22 3-caliber semi-automatic rifle. The shooter was male, committed the crimes from a car, was professionally trained, and had an extremely high hit rate. They knew nothing else. To find more clues, the police began to analyze, word by word, the notes and letters the sniper left behind, and they actually found a weak point. The note mentioned a case in Montgomery, Alabama. Logically, Alabama and Washington, D.C. are nearly 1,000 kilometers apart, so it shouldn't be connected to this serial shooting spree. Why would the sniper mention it? Police decided to investigate. They learned that the cold case mentioned in the letter was likely the murder of 52-year-old Claudine Parker. Her colleague, 24-year-old Kelly Adams, was also shot, but survived. A credit card was stolen at the time. Coincidentally, the number on that card matched the account number the sniper wanted police to transfer money to. Therefore, police confirmed that the killer in the Parker case and the Washington, D.C. serial shooter were the same person. And in the Parker case, there was a key piece of evidence: a magazine. On the magazine were several clear fingerprints. When the fingerprints were entered into the National Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System, they quickly matched a person. 17-year-old Jamaican Lee Boyd Malvo. He had previously been arrested for illegal immigration, so his fingerprints were in the system. Based on Malvo's personal connections, the police followed the trail and tracked down another suspect with close ties to him, John. Lee Boyd Malvo was born on February 18, 1985, in Jamaica, to an ordinary family in Kingston. His father was a mason, and his mother, Una, was a seamstress. His parents were not married. When he was 5, his parents separated, and Malvo lived with his mother, Una. His mother was not only very strict with him, beating him whenever he disobeyed, but also extremely selfish, often disappearing for periods of time, caring little about Malvo's well-being. In 1999, Una brought Malvo to live in Antigua, and it was there they met John. John's full name was John Allen Muhammad. He was born on December 31, 1960, in Louisiana. To an ordinary family, his mother died of an illness when he was 3, and his father was neglectful. Eventually, his father left to live his own life, leaving young John to be raised by his maternal grandmother and aunt. In 1978, at 18, John enlisted in the Louisiana Army National Guard. 7 years later, he transferred to the regular army. In the military, his marksmanship was excellent, and he earned the Expert Rifleman badge. In 1991, he served in the Gulf War and was awarded the Southwest Asia Service Medal and the Kuwait Liberation Medal on April 26, 1994, after serving for 16 years. John was honorably discharged. During his military service, John was married twice. His second wife was Mildred. They married in 1988 and eventually had 3 children. John adored his children. He was gentle with them, never scolding or hitting them. People around him said he was a good father. The children also loved their father. The family of 5 was happy and harmonious, but as life went on, conflicts arose between the couple and they eventually separated. John didn't want to lose custody of his 3 children, so in 1999, he secretly took them and hid in Antigua for 18 months. It was during this time that he met Malvo and his mother. At the time, John was raising 3 kids by himself, the picture of a model father. Una greatly admired him, and over time, she developed feelings for him. Of course, she had her own motives. Her lifelong dream was to go to America, no matter the cost. Later, John helped her obtain fake documents, and as for Malvo, he continued to live with John in Antigua. Having grown up without a father, Malvo had always longed for a father figure. Now, meeting John, a former soldier with outstanding marksmanship, he naturally idolized him and was completely obedient. In his heart, he already saw John as a father figure. John also grew fond of the boy and taught him many skills, including marksmanship. Subsequently, he used fake documents to bring Malvo to the United States. In September 2001, John lost custody of his 3 children. The court even revoked his visitation rights. This was a huge blow to him. Perhaps his descent into darkness began at this moment. In October, he changed his name from John Allen Williams to John Allen Muhammad. After finding the 2 men's files, the police contacted an old army buddy of John's, Robert, and asked him to listen to the recording of the sniper's earlier phone call to see if it was John's voice. After listening, Robert was certain that the voices belonged to Malvo and John. John had brought Malvo to his backyard to practice shooting many times. The teenager was always with John, obeying his every word and seeing him as a life mentor. In fact, 2 weeks after the shootings began, Robert already suspected the sniper was John, because from what he knew, John owned an assault rifle, was a very accurate shot, and he had always wanted to get revenge on his ex-wife, who happened to live in the DC area. He had called the tip line to try and warn the police, but because the line was so busy, he couldn't get through despite several attempts. Based on the information Robert provided, the police were certain that the snipers were John and Malvo. They immediately launched a manhunt. With clear targets, they quickly found out that on September 11, 2002, John had bought a retired police car, a blue Chevrolet Caprice with the license plate NDA21Z. Upon finding this, the police realized their previous direction was completely wrong. All this time, they had assumed the sniper was driving a small box van, as it would be more conducive for sniping. It's difficult to set up a sniper position in a sedan. They had no idea how John had modified that car. Subsequently, police made an announcement on the radio asking everyone to be on the lookout for a blue Chevrolet with the license plate NDA21Z. Though they didn't explicitly say it was the sniper's car, it wasn't long before they got a tip. On October 24, 2002, someone in Myersville, Maryland, at a rest stop near Interstate 70, spotted the Chevrolet. Nearby officers rushed to the scene immediately. But facing such dangerous criminals, the first officers to arrive didn't dare act rashly. They quietly blocked the exit with their cars and waited for backup. At 3:15 a.m., dozens of heavily armed SWAT officers arrived and surrounded the vehicle. The SWAT team, weapons drawn, slowly closed in. Because John and Malvo were asleep in the car at the time, they were completely unprepared, so the arrest went very smoothly. They didn't say a word when they were arrested, as if they already knew their fate. Inside the car, police found a Bushmaster assault rifle, stolen from a gun shop, a scope, a bipod, a laptop, maps, and 20 rounds of ammunition. Additionally, the car had been modified. The back of the rear seat was hollowed out, and a small hole was cut above the license plate on the trunk lid. This allowed a person to lie in the trunk and shoot through the hole. John and Malvo, one driving and the other lying in the back, sniping, was how they managed to commit the crimes with almost no cleanup and flee the scene immediately. This also explains why, at many of the shooting scenes, not even a shell casing was found, because the casings were left inside the car. Weapons experts, after ballistic testing, concluded that the Bushmaster from the car was linked to 11 of the 14 shooting incidents in the DC area. At this point, the police were greatly relieved and immediately held a press conference to share the good news with the entire nation.
We are gathered to share some information with regards to a sniper situation that has been occurring in the Washington metropolitan area.
At approximately 1 o'clock a.m. today, a motorist called 911 to report seeing a 1990 Chevy Caprice.
People from all walks of life cheered. They could finally go out without fear. Some even ran outside their homes to take deep breaths of the free air, exclaiming how good it felt to be free and safe. After their arrest, John and Malvo remained silent, refusing to communicate with the police. Considering John was a retired soldier with strong mental fortitude, he would be a tough nut to crack. So the officers turned their attention to 17-year-old Malvo. And indeed, after a soft approach interrogation, Malvo chose to confess and admitted to all the shootings. According to him, most of the time, he was the one in the back, sniping. John was responsible for selecting locations, planning, driving, and being the lookout. Furthermore, their shooting spree didn't begin on October 2nd, but rather at the beginning of the year on February 16th. In the preceding 7 months, they had carried out multiple shootings, already causing 7 deaths and 7 injuries. Because the early shootings had long intervals between them and were not geographically concentrated, the police initially did not connect them to the series of shootings in the DC area. If the previous incidents are included, total number of shootings would increase to 27, resulting in a total of 17 deaths and 10 injuries. By rights, John and Malvo were arrested in Maryland, and most of the shootings occurred there, so they should have been tried in that state. But the U.S. Attorney General ultimately assigned the case to the state of Virginia. As for the reason, it was said that Virginia's laws were stricter, making a death penalty sentence more likely. In October 2003, John was tried in Virginia, simultaneously facing charges of terrorism, conspiracy, and illegal use of a firearm, among others. The prosecution called over 130 witnesses, with the key witness being Malvo. They also presented over 400 pieces of evidence. Although there were no direct eyewitnesses, the evidence was sufficient to prove that John was the mastermind and should be sentenced to death. The defense attorney, however, argued that there were no eyewitnesses from start to finish. Although John's fingerprints were on the murder weapon, it couldn't be proven that John had ever pulled the trigger. He should not be sentenced to death. Ultimately, after 5 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a unanimous decision finding John guilty of murder, terrorism, conspiracy, and illegal use of a firearm, all 4 charges. He was found guilty on all counts. On March 9, 2004, he was formally sentenced to death. John appealed, but the Virginia Supreme Court upheld the death sentence. The Supreme Court justice stated that John showed a disregard for human life, and through careful calculation, meticulous planning, and premeditation, carried out a series of brutal terrorist acts. The death penalty was the most just outcome. After the trial in Virginia concluded, John was extradited to Maryland to face another trial. There, he faced 6 counts of murder. On June 1, 2006, John was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences, without parole. However, for someone already on death row, this trial didn't hold much significance. Therefore, Alabama, Washington, and several other states didn't want to waste taxpayers' money on further trials. Afterward, John continued his desperate struggle, appealing with various excuses, like brain damage, to try and escape the death penalty, but all his attempts failed. As for Malvo, he also went through multiple trials in several states. However, because he was only 17 at the time of the crimes, and he proactively confessed, he was spared the death penalty. On March 10, 2004, in Virginia, Malvo was convicted on 2 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. On October 26th, he was again sentenced to life in prison without parole. In 2006, in Maryland, Malvo, for 6 murders, was sentenced to 6 life sentences without parole. He has since been incarcerated in Virginia's highest security prison, Red Onion State Prison. It's worth mentioning that during John's trial, Malvo, as a witness, revealed the shocking motive for the crimes and a long-devised plan. He said John's goal in planning the shootings was to establish a terrorist training camp and paralyze the United States. His plan had 3 phases. Phase 1, conduct multiple rehearsals in the DC area, draw maps, and identify sniper locations and escape routes. The plan was to shoot 6 white people a day for 30 days. Phase 2, in Baltimore, shoot a white, pregnant woman and a police officer. Then, plant a bomb at the officer's funeral to kill more police officers. However, they didn't get to implement this part. Phase 3, kidnap hostages with a focus on children. Then demand $10 million from the U.S. government. Finally, travel to Canada. He planned to establish a base in Canada, recruit uneducated, homeless black boys, and put them through various training programs, especially marksmanship. Once trained, he would send them to various parts of the U.S. for large-scale shootings, plunging the United States into complete chaos and paralysis. John had a strong hatred for white people. He believed white people were the devil and therefore must be eliminated. But John's friend Robert believed John's motive might be much simpler. He wanted to get revenge on his ex-wife. and regain custody of his 3 children. Robert said, John loved his children very much. In September 2001, after losing custody of his 3 children, he completely lost his mind. He had explicitly said he wanted to kill his ex-wife. Moreover, the first shooting he committed on February 16, 2002, targeted 21-year-old Kenya Cook. Kenya's aunt was John's ex-wife's best friend and had encouraged her to get a divorce. Robert believed John wanted to get revenge on his ex-wife, but was afraid the police would directly trace it back to him. So he started by targeting people around his ex-wife, deliberately creating a series of shootings to confuse the police. He learned that his ex-wife had brought their 3 children to the D.C. area, so he followed them there, committing crimes in her vicinity. His ex-wife Mildred also told police that she had always been John's target. Their relationship was okay in the beginning, but after he returned from the Gulf War, John became negative and paranoid. One night after they separated, John secretly snuck into her house, stood by her bed, and said he was going to kill her. He later sent her a message saying, "You have become my enemy. As my enemy, I will kill you." She felt that for years. John had been trying to kill her, but no one ever believed her. The series of shootings John committed was just a smokescreen to kill her and regain custody of their 3 children. A smokescreen. She later wrote a book, Scared Silent, detailing the domestic abuse she suffered from John and how he tried to take her life. On November 10, 2009, John was scheduled to be executed by lethal injection. Before the injection, the warden asked him if he had any last words, but he remained silent from beginning to end. In fact, he never admitted his guilt. At the time, his children were waiting by the phone, thinking their father would call to say goodbye. But John waived his right to make a phone call. At 9:11 p.m., under the watchful eyes of many victims' families, John was executed by lethal injection. Looking back at these cases, the police, throughout the investigation process, deployed a massive amount of manpower. Logically, they should have found some clues. After all, there were many surveillance cameras at the crime scenes. It was discovered later that the seemingly covert investigation was not so covert. During the roadblocks set up across several states, John Chevrolet was pulled over multiple times. But at the time, police were fixated on the white box van, so they let him go. On October 3rd and October 8th, police stopped John's car separately, and there was a witness who said they had seen the Chevrolet at the crime scene. But police still let him go, without further investigation. In 2003, 2 survivors and the families of 6 victims filed a civil lawsuit against Bushmaster Firearms and the gun dealership, because the gun that caused all this tragedy was stolen from a dealership in Tacoma, Washington. This gun was extremely powerful, the civilian version of the famous military M16, a classic murder weapon. The families argued that it was Bushmaster's manufacturing of this gun and the gun shop's negligence that indirectly led to this series of tragedies. Ultimately, they reached a $2.5 million settlement. And don't think this ruling was unfair to the gun shop, because a later investigation found that this gun shop, in the past 3 years, had lost a total of 238 guns. Of those, more than 50 were linked to various criminal incidents. This terrifying rate of lost guns. If they weren't a legitimate gun shop, you'd think they specialized in arming criminals. Finally, let's look at Malvo's situation. While serving his sentence, he has repeatedly admitted his wrongdoing and apologized to the victims' families. In a 2012 interview with the Washington Post, he said, "I was a monster. A true monster is like this. I took people's lives like a ghost. I became a tool in someone else's hands, just because he told me to do it. The reason I am this way is entirely the result of John's deliberate training and brainwashing. It was he who turned me into a monster. He also sexually abused me. Therefore, one psychologist believed Malvo deserved sympathy. As a child at the time, he was deliberately led down the wrong path. He now recognizes his mistakes and should be given a chance. Of course, many people see it differently, because the investigation revealed that as a child, Malvo often tortured small animals, and as he grew up, he showed clear signs of antisocial personality disorder. Besides, he was always free to go. He could have left John at any time, but he didn't. He compared himself to Neo from The Matrix, wanting to act as a savior to overthrow the current society. In other words, he harbored a strong resentment towards society. He should not be given the chance to walk out of prison. In fact, Due to changes in the law, the debate on whether to lift Malvo's without parole restriction has been ongoing. Perhaps one day he might actually walk out of prison alive. Finally, one more thing worth mentioning. In March 2020, Malvo got married in prison. It sounds absurd, but I trust that our longtime viewers are no longer surprised by such things. That concludes this harrowing story. Please show your support with a like and subscribe. Every click is a huge encouragement for me. This is DarkCaseX, and I'll see you next time.